Dr. Hanvey, whom I first met, we were trying to work him out 5 or 6 years ago on an Ignatian conference, and I knew of his brilliance then, and I know it even more now. He will do an introduction, but he is master of Company Hall, which is the Jesuit centre in Oxford, just south of the city. So I think I'll hand it over to you, James.
Well, I just want to thank Georgie for organising this series, and because it's a wonderful opportunity for us to share around these ideas or moments and explore the idea of glimpses. I've been a Jesuit for about 40 years now. And one of the things about our formation is how it trains us and invites us and forms us into that sense of God's presence at work in all things. I'll come to that at the end, but I wanted to come at this in a slightly different way, because I wanted to suggest that the glimpses come to us in many different ways. They can come to us in art, in music, in drama. Something opens for us. Very often it's when we're not expecting it. And it's not just an insight or an understanding. It can also be in a conversation or in a silence or in a relationship. It's not just that something opens outwards in the sense of transcendence. It can sometimes be that something opens inwards, within. And it's not necessary that we understand these moments. At least it's not necessary that we understand them in the normal ways. And very often they become elusive when we try to grasp them and analyze them. Because when these glimpses come, it's not about mastery, it's about attentiveness. It's more about presence. And it's a sense of seeing, even just for a moment, into the heart of things. But often this is being present to a vastness, living in many different dimensions, in the structures of the past and of the future and of the present, but also in the deeper structure of eternity itself, being enfolded. Those are the sorts of glimpses that can occur to us. And I think when they do happen, all that we can do is accept them in silence and humility. Sometimes in pain, but more often than not in gratitude and in completeness. I think one of these first moments for me happened at a very early age when I was about 12 or 13, and we were reading The Merchant of Venice. And towards the end, in the last scene of The Merchant, there's a wonderful reconciliation that takes place. We've lived through the drama and the pain and the confusion and the struggles and the misunderstandings and the misreadings. And then at the end, Shakespeare brings us to this wonderful reconciliation. It doesn't abandon the hurts and the confusions, doesn't take away the memory of what is past, but somehow integrates it into a wonderful harmony, and you have a sense of a world that has been lived in, but a world also that has become whole. And you recall those lovely lines, the exchange of music at the end between Jessica and Lorenzo, in which there's a celebration of the ordering and healing powers of music. The man that hath no music in himself, nor is not moved with concord of sweet sounds, is fit for treason's stratagems and spoils. The motions of his spirit are dull as night, and his affections dark as Erebus. Let no such man be trusted. Mark the music. Mark the music. Indeed, it's marking that music, not just in sounds or of instruments, but the music in words, and the music that runs through memory, and the music that runs through feeling and thought and actions. That music, not only of the spheres, but the deep music of life itself. And we hear it not just with our ears, but with our mind and our heart and our soul. For me, poetry is often my tutor. It makes me aware, it makes me present and observant, and it teaches me that even in the most trivial passing moments, or in the most simple of objects, a whole door can open into something whose depth cannot be measured. I want just to give two very quick examples of that, which work for me. The first is George Herbert's poem, The Dawning. This is a season of the resurrection. Today in the old Christian churches, they celebrate the Feast of the Ascension. We in the modern Catholic Church celebrate it on Sunday. Now, there's a very deep personal association in this poem. It's an unusual little poem that you can miss. We can be familiar with the delicacy of Herbert's voice and his celebration. But this poem first registered with me when I was headmaster of our school in Glasgow. And one of the things that always surprised me throughout my whole teaching life, but particularly as a headmaster, how you'd think in a school you would be dealing so much with life in the future, and yet there was so much you had to deal with in terms of death and of sickness and all the rest. And we had a very engaging, charming, young deputy head girl, very vivacious. And she took very ill. And we thought she might just pull through. There was a critical moment. I was with the family. We were keeping vigil in the emergency unit of the Royal in Glasgow. And they said if she can get through this critical moment, I remember it very vividly, it was a Wednesday night, then the chances are she would recover. She was unconscious. She did get through that. And we thought, wonderful, our prayers have been answered. Because as a headmaster, you're not only dealing with the family, and as a priest, not only dealing with the family, but of course you're carrying the whole school community. And then I was out shopping on the Saturday, and the news came through that she had died. And you can imagine how desolate that news was, especially in the light that we thought things were going to improve. And when I did the funeral, and it was a wonderful occasion, the whole school turned out, and her boyfriend, who was also at the school, I'll never forget being with him at her cremation. He was the loneliest person in the world. Then the sixth form got together and they wanted to do a little booklet just of commemoration. And one of the poems they chose for that commemoration was this George Herbert's The Dawning. And it speaks of the resurrection. And the resurrection is the most difficult and dangerous thing because our imaginations can get it wrong. We're all familiar with the reaction of the inhabitants of the Areopagus to Paul. There's always a danger that when we try to imagine it, that we think this isn't right, this can't happen, because our minds can't imagine it. Paul himself struggles and gives a magnificent range of images and even signs to try and capture that moment of change and transformation beyond our imaginings. There's the great trumpets, then there's the absolute contrast of the seed sown in death bursting into glory. Donne is another poet who captures this. He talks, if you recall, in one of his holy sonnets, "At the round's earth, imagine corners, blow your trumpets, angels, and arise from death, you numberless infinities of souls, and to your scattered bodies go." In Donne, we hear and see before us, in rhythm and in image, the shining trumpet, the transfiguring moment. But Herbert is not like that. Herbert, it's not so much the end of time that we celebrate, the moment of triumph and of judgment. His moment is more strange. It's quiet. It's ambiguous. It's the moment of the dawn, but it hasn't forgotten the suffering. And in this poem, he is exhorting us, but he's also recognizing that we are still wrapped in the pain of loss. Let me just read that poem for you. I have some copies there for you too, if you'd like to take some. Awake, sad heart, whom sorrow ever drowns, take up thine eyes, which feed on earth. Unfold thy forehead, gathered into frowns. Thy Saviour comes, and with him mirth. Awake, awake, and with a thankful heart his comforts take. But thou dost still lament and pine and cry, and feel his death, but not his victory. Arise, sad heart. If thou dost not withstand Christ's resurrection, thine may be. Do not by hanging down break from the hand which as it riseth raiseth thee. Arise, arise, and with his burial linen dry thine eyes. Christ left his grave clothes, that we might, when grief draws tears or blood, not want a handkerchief. Herbert's voice and art are all there, but so is his delicate, consoling wit. He teaches us to look for the small signs within the everyday and the familiar, the things that we might take for granted, the things we might never notice, the folded handkerchief, and see there a proof of love, a way into a quiet hope, a token of a lover who has not abandoned us, but with such courtesy encourages us. It seems to me that Herbert teaches me that there are so many tokens, these signs within the ordinary things of our lives, our losses, but we never notice because we are waiting for the trumpet, the spectacular, and yet there is a glory present in the simple things. Herbert shows us how to be attentive. In another way, a poet of my own place, Northern Ireland, Seamus Heaney, also teaches us how to be attentive. But he teaches us that it's very often in retrospect that we discover those moments, in memory and place, and above all, in the ordinary moments of intimacy which we just let flow through us. In Seamus Heaney, there is music in place and in soil, in the turning of a spade or the clanging of a hammer on an anvil. But land and object for Heaney carry memory. They locate us, they place us in time, and then the confines of the moment are not an obstacle to grace. But surely, whether we believe it or not, that there is a better place than where we are. There is a moment of depth hidden within the shell of what we're doing. Heaney has a beautiful, honest poem about the death of his mother. It's a moment of union, of communion, intense, innocent, and loving, all in the shared daily work of peeling potatoes. Let me just give you that one. When all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. They broke the silence, let fall one by one like solder weeping off the soldering iron. Cold comforts set between us, things to share gleaming in a bucket of clean water, and again let fall. Little pleasant splashes from each other's work would bring us to our senses. So, while the parish priest at her bedside went hammer and tongs at the prayers for the dying, and some were responding and some crying, I remembered her head bent towards my head, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives. Think again, as a priest, so many times been at the bedside or of someone who's dying or in the presence of someone who's dying. And it's very often whatever is happening in the and liturgy of death, and it can be powerful and comforting and beautiful, there is always this deeper liturgy of memories of those intimate moments that suddenly come back to us. And we know that what's celebrated there is not a loss, but a communion. And the sonnet form in which Heaney gives that seems to me to be the right form for a glimpse. It's the way in which sound locates the splashing of the potatoes in the water and the rhythm of the prayers of the dying, the public act within the community of faith and the private personal actions of communion between mother and child. Not seen, but lived and mingled breath, a union of souls which transcends the moment of death and always will. If poetry in this sense can be our school, which opens us to these glimpses and helps us to hold these glimpses so that they become great moments, not just passing moments, then for me the other great school of this is in the exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. He's the founder of the Society of Jesus. And one of his biographers described him as a tongue-tied mystic. Ignatius doesn't have the eloquence of Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross or anything. Ignatius really gives us things to do. He's a teacher in that sense. But he's a teacher on this way to God, to open us so that we become attuned. And he does this through what's called the spiritual exercises. There are 4 weeks, and through that we're taught how to pray, how to dispose ourselves, how to encounter God. And at the end, and it becomes a formation for our whole lives, of course, but at the end there's a great contemplation called the Contemplatio ad Amorem. It's called the contemplation to attain the love of God. And I'm going to read just the 3 little exercises at the end of it. These are 3 things that any one of us can do. And we can do them while we're on the bus, or while we're in our garden, or while we're about to curse because we have to wash the dishes, whatever. So, here's the first point. This is how to reflect on how God dwells in creatures, in the elements, giving them existence, in the plants, giving them life, in the animals, conferring upon them sensation, in us, bestowing understanding. So he dwells in me and gives me being, life, sensation, intelligence, and makes a temple of me, since I am created in the likeness and image of the divine majesty. I start with the gratitude for the God dwelling in me. Then, this is to consider how God works and labors for me in all creatures upon the face of the earth. That is, he conducts himself as one who labors. Thus, in the heavens, the elements, the plants, the fruits, the cattle, he gives being, conserves them, confers life and sensation. What I'm seeing, invited to move beyond myself and see in what happens around me, in the whole of creation, that I am being upheld, that all of that creation communicates and enfolds me in love, a love which sustains me and carries me, whatever the circumstances that I find myself in. And then the final point. This is to consider all blessings and gifts as descending from above. Thus, my limited power comes from the supreme and infinite power above, and so too justice, goodness, mercy. They descend from above as the rays of light descend from the sun and as waters flow from their fountains. Those rays of light and those waters flowing from their fountains, at that point, Ignatius becomes a poet. And he makes poets of us. And all that he asks of us is to take time to reflect on our lives, to reflect on the world, but to take time to be grateful, to see and to find is not just a glimpse when we do that, but it becomes a whole plenitude. Just 3 reflections. So we're now in your hands, Georgie, I think.
Just an observation on your last gift to us. I read a sermon recently by somebody from the Society of John the Evangelist, and he was describing time as holy because on the 7th day the Sabbath was created, and it was holy. I think it's just a wonderful thought that time, which we waste and we push away, is so precious. I would very much like it if any of you have a contribution to make about your own experiences. That would be very good to hear if you're willing.
Maybe you just want to take time.
I'll offer something to pick us off. I was at Revd Priory many years ago. I went for a walk first thing in the morning. And as I was coming back and walking past the kitchens and the privet hedge that was about this height, 5 feet maybe, I saw a pair of the bluest eyes I have ever seen in my life. And these eyes, which obviously belong to a person, were looking at something with such intent, attention, that I had to find out what it was he was looking at. And as I got nearer, I saw that on this hedge there was a cobweb, and the cobweb was filled with dew, beads of dew. It was so beautiful, but so were those eyes.